Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our industry briefing for August of 2023. And Scott, joined here by Scott, our VP of Customer Retention and Growth. Scott, welcome back in.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, I was going to say I was taking a walk this morning like I normally do, and it was interesting. I walked by a bus stop full of kids. We're here in North Carolina. We do year-round school, so now's when the next cohort starts. I think it's called Track 4. Anyway, and no sooner did I get home than I had one of these on my phone. You guys can see this. It is a political text message. So it made me realize that it was time, Scott, to get back out in front of all the folks out there who are doing political text messaging or who were considering doing it to help them understand all the things that have changed, what's new, what's different, and also what is sort of carried over from the midterms and are now going into, I can't believe we're saying it, the general election cycle is basically
Hmm.
has already started. So
Yep.
nobody better to talk to that than you with the most experience. So let's actually dive right in. So I know we always start with this, Scott, but it still astounds me that during the
Mhm.
last two cycles of elections, I got zero emails. Now, am I still getting fundraising emails from certain candidates? I am, but none of them were related to the races that were happening. What I did get were political text messages. So it feels like all the campaigns have shifted their focus and funding away from email to a large extent to texting because of this 98% open and read rate within minutes, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I think you've got a bullet here. 1.3 billion texts
Mm.
went out for a midterm election.
Yeah.
Considering how much spending's going on for the 2024 general election, I think that you could probably see an increase of 20 to 30% above that. So
Mm. Right.
there's going to be a lot of messaging going out.
For sure. And really, I think the big message from this is that there are large volume and local messaging opportunities. And we're going to kind of get to that later on about what are the best formats that give you that capacity that you might
Hmm.
need or want. And
Hmm.
also, and you brought this up, which I found interesting, is that there are now new limits in terms of the size of those images and things that you can send based on format. So we're going to give you guys the skinny on the best ones to be able to deliver those payloads. And last but
Yeah.
not least, if you're a provider and you're not doing political text messaging, there's still time to make some outreach and find those contacts that can actually allow you to participate in this season, right?
Yeah, that's an actually a very important point that you're making here, right? Is for, and we'll get into that, as you said, but if you are a provider, if you're in using text messaging for marketing, alerts, notification, but text messaging is a big part of your business, and you're looking for ways to, like, how can you still make money with text messaging for your business. Political messaging is a nice alternative, right? It's a new avenue, but a lot of people may not be familiar with what it takes to get in there. I think the first step is identifying, contacting, your local, your PACs, right, your action committees, or your local
Right.
candidates directly, and let them know that you can actually potentially process the messaging for them, right?
Yeah, for
Find those
sure.
customers.
You got it. That's right. So what's interesting is that I think you and I both know that there are specific rules around political usage of both, robocalling as well as
Mhm.
messaging, right?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting too, right? Because, if you're text messaging, you're not really texting a landline, you're texting a mobile subscriber.
Hmm.
So, that doesn't necessarily, I think, apply to the landlines. I don't think anybody's getting text messages on landlines. So you have to kind of follow the rules for text messaging to mobile subscribers. And, the big thing there is, you need to have written consent to send them a text message. Even per the FCC, that's a requirement unless the text message is being sent from an individual
Right.
and is manually being transmitted, not through an auto dialer.
Right. There you go. It's interesting you say that because these two messages I got, which were both from this presidential candidate I've never heard of before, and when I replied stop, nothing happened. So there's a good
Mhm.
chance that there's sort of a set of folks that allowed their phones to be used to send those messages to me, and that's why the stop probably didn't register.
Yeah, I think that's a real critical component, right? That's a mandatory TCPA requirement to have that opt-out functionality, and that absolutely applies to text to political text messaging as well.
Hmm.
And making sure that the opt-out or the stop works correctly really is going to keep you out of trouble with the
Yeah.
carriers, right? Because usually a voter or a mobile subscriber is going to simply respond with stop.
Right.
If they keep getting text messages, and I think you mentioned that here in a couple slides, political text messaging is sensitive. It can be volatile, right? So you're more likely to get a mobile subscriber flagging your content or flagging your text message as unsolicited spam, which
Yeah.
can actually cause you more problems with the carriers, right? So having the stop work correctly and even providing a confirmation. In fact, some DCAs want to see that confirmation you have been unsubscribed from this mailing list,
Yep.
right? Or your opt out has been successful, right? Sending that confirmation is actually very, very good best practice. So
Yep. Yep. I want to be able to prove that. And that we did include a link here, by the way. There are some very specific rules that go even more in depth than we have here at the FCC.gov website. So recommend you guys go check that out if you want to get some of the latest information from the FCC.
yep.
And we were talking about this earlier, Scott, that even political robocalling has gotten tougher as of last month, right?
Yeah, this actually came out just a couple of weeks ago. And so, I mean, this is specifically targeted at the political, phone call or robocalling. But it could be one of those things where this can get, like all things do, and with robocalling and the FCC, this at some point can get basically rolled over to text messaging. I'm not sure how some of these components will work within a text messaging ecosystem, but it's just something to be aware of and just know that that the government and the carriers are really kind of paying attention to what's going on. So
Yeah.
following our best practices and tips and tricks will ensure your success with it.
Yeah, and I think Scott, you'd agree that we have a lot of partners that are doing robocalling because we got to be clear that there's completely okay robocalling and then there's illegal robocalling. So,
Correct.
and the way to kind of differentiate the two as well is that if you follow these rules and you're using an automated system, you need to dial it back to literally, I just said that out loud, to only dial a specific number, a certain number of times within a certain time period, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as
Yep.
long as you've got that automated system in place that you can stay out of trouble, it's the ones where people just they're not really paying attention. They don't have that automation built in. They're calling
Mm-hmm.
too often over too short of a period of time, and that will really get you into trouble. So, and
Yeah.
I think too, we can't say this often enough, Scott. During our last session together, we talked about this. Like, if you don't already have somebody at your organization, if you offer this as a service, who's in charge of compliance and understanding these rules,
Yep.
you're a little bit behind. You're about a year behind because that written policy, staff training, and hiring somebody who's your compliance coordinator, whatever you want to call them,
Mm-hmm.
it's so essential because you and I both know the FCC and other organizations that are handling compliance. It's not just hand slaps and small fines anymore. There are literally entire companies that have been shut down because of doing the illegal version of robocalling and robotexting.
Tens of millions of dollars of fines have been
Yeah,
levied in the last several months alone regarding some companies. I think the majority of them are overseas, but I mean, yeah, they're
right,
definitely serious about it. And the other thing too is that, and this is why it's really important, is that individual states now are rolling out their own requirements for
right.
robocalling and texting. So, you look at literally, and at some point it could be individual cities might have their own requirements, right? So having someone who is a compliance expert, whether that is on staff or that's somebody that you're consulting with or you're outsourcing to, can really keep track and tell you what you can and cannot do. And that'll keep you out of trouble because it only takes a couple of these,
Yeah,
not paying attention to, now you're in a business critical situation where, and
yeah.
you're being called into litigation because of you just didn't follow the best practices or the rules.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something we can help, all the folks with that are looking for a partner like Commio to help with these things. But, you and I both know that, even if some people would say that, well, hey, if we only get like a 20% rate of people, complaining, maybe that's okay. The reality is it needs to be less than 1%, right? I mean, it's got to be
Yeah, and
small.
text
Yeah,
messaging opt-out rates, and that's why it's also important to be very familiar with the individual mobile carriers' acceptable use policies or codes of
yeah,
conduct,
right.
because they are different from carrier to carrier. And I think T-Mobile, their AUP states less than 0.5%
Yeah,
opt-out, right? And so I think there's some flexibility with that specific, that amount, but the key is the carriers are stating, hey, they expect to have low opt-outs for all customers, all traffic use
yep.
cases.
Yeah, and if there's one of the carriers you don't want to get tangled up with, it's T-Mobile, right? They've
Yeah,
got
yeah,
the, yeah,
that's
yeah,
accurate. Yep.
yep. So if we take a look at Scott, we talked about, what's the most ideal format for sending these political text messages. Let's kind of go through each of these, and would love to get your thoughts on that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think, short code is fantastic. If you're, I would look at short code as when you're a national pack, you're the DNC or the RNC or some national pack, and you're not really constrained to geographic, requirements for contacting the constituents or the subscribers. So, if it's a national brand and you're really trying to get out a lot of messages in a short period of time, short code is really probably the best mechanism for that. However, short code does not support callback, obviously. So if that's something that I think are important to your messaging content, whether you're doing fundraising or you're doing polling, or if you're announcing some kind of a town hall event, short code is great just for a FYI. It's a notification type of platform. However, it does take quite a bit of time to get set up, and 3 months I think is on average kind of what we're seeing it today. I've seen these take longer than 3 months, and you have to understand that short codes have to be approved by each mobile carrier that you want to send on. So that means that short code application goes to Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, US Cellular, et cetera. And each one of them will review your use case. They will deeply vet what kind of content you're sending. They'll do a lot of vetting on the brand, and so they have to give approval. They have to sign off on that, right? And that can take some time. So, and also the upfront costs. Short codes are fantastic once they're set up, but they have a lot of upfront costs. They have monthly maintenance fees. They have slightly higher messaging per text fees, and then of course they have their surcharges as well. So it's definitely an option. But one of the things that we're seeing a lot of success with recently is toll free.
Mm-hmm.
So toll free does have less, I'd say, red tape and bureaucracy than let's say 10DLC. We are now seeing faster turnarounds. I know that there was a couple of months ago, it was taking a little bit longer to get these reviewed and vetted, but now we're seeing these within a few days versus multiple weeks to get your campaign and your numbers verified. So now the only drawback I think on the toll free now is as you mentioned earlier, was the actual payload size. So and I guess I'm getting in front of myself here, but typically on the political side, what we saw in the last couple elections is that most large political entities are actually leaning towards MMS versus SMS,
Right.
and so and that just seems to be more favorable. On toll free, the payload size for MMS is lower than it is on short code and 10DLC, so something to consider. And we will have, we do have that data available through, Commio.com if you want to look at what that looks like specifically. So
Mm-hmm.
cost-wise, though, toll-free now is kind of in parity with the 10DLC fees. As we know, 10DLC, registration fees are changing almost monthly. And so now they're at a point throughout with all the carriers that your costs on toll free are about the same, maybe slightly higher still, but it seems like for a lot of people it's worth it because you don't have as much hassle up front. So, and
Gotcha.
then, of course, there's always 10DLC. 10DLC is, I think, going to be your best option if you really need to reach out to a smaller local geographic or local demographic, right? So if it's you're a congressional representative in a particular district, right? You're not trying to have a message campaign go out nationally. You just need to get it to, let's say, a few thousand people or 10,000 people in your particular district. So long codes are really good for that, and the data shows that long codes do have a traditionally better open rate. But you will have to go through some additional steps to get those 10DLC political campaigns approved. So
Right. And as we mentioned here, though, the verified political traffic does have the highest daily limit through the TCR for long code. So that's one thing to keep in mind.
yeah, I think you've got a slide on that that's coming up,
Yeah.
and that is true, right? I mean, especially if you're a business that is using text messaging as a key component of your communications platform. The political use case does have the highest throughput on AT&T, and if I recall, I think it was actually uncapped on T-Mobile, right? So
Hmm.
that may have changed, but I still think that you're right. I mean, you're going to provide the highest daily throughputs for 10 DLC are going to be in that political spectrum.
That's right. That's right. Even that first text message I got from the Republican candidate I never heard of was a 10 DLC number. I was surprised that it
Yep.
wasn't toll free.
Yep.
We also mentioned this tip here about how to get a token from Campaign Verify, right? And that helps with the toll free whitelisting.
Yeah, I mean, this is important for everybody to remember. At this point in the game, everything, whether you're using short code, toll free, or long code, your use case, your brand, all of that is going to be verified by the DCA, the Direct Connectivity Aggregator. Those are the gateway providers to all the mobile carriers. So whether you're submitting it, regardless of what channel, you're going to have a an agent at the DCA who's going to be looking it over manually. It's not auto approved, right? So even though we're, the toll free process seems to be a little bit less red tape, if you were able to get a token from the Campaign Verify, website, and you could actually put that as in the special instructions on your toll free application, it just gives them a sense of security that you've been verified, you are legitimate, and your chances of having your toll free numbers verified are much higher if you can get that token. Not required, but definitely recommended.
Love it. Great tip. And then as we mentioned, here's basically the throughputs, right? Per format.
Yep, yep. So on the short code, right? I mean, again, it takes a little bit of time, very deep vetting process, carrier approval. But once you get a short code, I mean, there really isn't any type of, basically it's wide open, right? The carriers kind of look at it. Hey, they did all this additional vetting. They went through who you are as a company, where you're located, and they have a really high trust that you are who you are and your content will be what you say it's going to be. So they don't do as much filtering on the short code, and they typically have probably the highest throughputs of any of the different messaging options. So
Hmm.
toll free, that's another thing too that we've seen change recently, and I'd say in the last several months, is that toll free also doesn't have per se a daily limit. Everything is based on message throughputs, right? So if you're doing like A2P marketing and you're doing something that would typically score pretty low on the 10DLC side, you're probably just going to have a lower throughput with toll free. Political messaging, especially as everything's verified, if you put a campaign verified token in there, you're probably going to get a much higher messaging throughput on the toll free. So I think that ranges anywhere from 3 messages a second to over 100 messages a second. And I think on the political side, again, depending on how well your brand and your message samples and everything's put together, you're probably falling somewhere in that, I'd say the middle, I'd probably say 30 to 50 messages per second. And you have the ability, right? If you, for some reason, you feel like you're not getting the throughput that you need, you can always open a ticket with Commio. We can reach out to the DCA and request that you have those throughputs increased.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
of course, as we just talked about long code,
Right.
if you're not doing political, I mean, your throughput and your maximum daily limits are going to be based how you were scored, right? Your use case and how your brand was scored. Political messaging definitely has the most roomiest use case in the 10 DLC world. So definitely a good option there.
Yeah, it's great. And something to keep in mind too is that when you're working with somebody like Commio who can help, get these messages delivered, also is the sort of thinking ahead about, getting the numbers that you need. So we just did a webinar earlier this week with Katie, our head of client success, talking about our
Mhm.
system makes it easy that we already have lots of numbers in our inventory, but if you need a block of additional numbers, you can custom order them by area code, MPA, NXX, all those good things. So just something to keep in mind that, number availability is key, and that's something that we can definitely help with while you're
Absolutely.
putting your
Yep.
campaigns together for sure. And let's talk about Campaign Verify, which you already mentioned. So I love that idea that we're getting to this point in the industry where we have these checks in place where people can sort of verify who they are. This whole know your customer thing is sort of boiling
Mhm.
down through all the formats, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's really critical. And so, it's very important to the FCC, the government. It's also very important to the mobile carriers. And so, knowing that regardless of what channel you're going to be applying to get approval to send traffic on, it's going to be a vet. They're going to vet everything. They're going to look at who you are on the 10 DLC. They're going to do a little bit. They're going to dig a little bit deeper. They're going to look at your FEIN, right? That's how your brand scores being established. And then, of course, if you're wanting to send political traffic, they do require you to have this campaign verified token. right? And
Hmm.
so, and I think you do have the website campaignverified.org, and there's quite a bit of information on their site about, who can get approved, who's not eligible, and then also best practices as well. So, if you are a party, a political party, a PAC, a local individual representative, as long as you're filed as a 527 tax exempt organization and you're registered with the FEC, you should be able to get that campaign token. And so you'll need that to get approved by the DCA for the political use case, and then, of course, to have those higher throughputs. You also do mention that, obviously 501c3s, 501c4s are not eligible for this.
Right.
So there's definitely a lot more on that. Definitely recommend going to campaignverify.org to get all the details of what it takes to get that token. Once you have the token, then when you go in through, whether you're using an API or using our portal, and you select that political use case, right, you're going to be asked to provide that token, right? That token means basically you've been vetted as a legitimate 527 tax exempt organization for this use case.
Right.
Um,
Great.
Also, the good news about that, right? And I think having that token, if you do decide that you still want to go maybe right towards the short code route or the toll free, right? That's just an extra thing that you can provide to the DCA that lets them know you've been vetted, you are legitimate, and that they shouldn't see any additional problems from you. That's that really falls into the know your customer thing. So definitely
Gotcha.
worth considering.
So you have to have it for 10 DLC, but it's nice to have for the others. Makes
Yep.
sense. Okay.
Yep.
Got it. All right. And then, yeah, let's talk about the TCR. So obviously we've been talking to them for a long time, working with them for a long time to do
Mhm.
10 DLC brand and campaign registry.
Yep.
But we're adding sort of on this part as well. I guess just
Yeah. And
yeah. No, go
oh,
ahead.
I would add here too. I mean, so I think when the campaign registry first came out, right, and I think we did see some of this manual vetting for the midterms, but political messaging starts, as we know, right, well before the election. So just to hit that home, right, is everything is vetted by a human being. So and that's a requirement by the carriers. In fact, so if you think, well, I go through this one, I go through this one CSP, and so I don't need to, they're not requiring that. Regardless of who you use, the mobile carriers are now requiring that all vetting is being done on every campaign that's being submitted.
Right. Gotcha. It's a whole new world. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's a good thing for the industry as well as the users and voters and everything.
Yep.
Um, so here we go. How to qualify for brand approvals with the TCR.
Yeah, this is one of those areas. I mean, I've never personally gone through this particular process, but a lot of our customers have. So I would definitely recommend going to the campaign verify site, and I think they have more details about what the process is. It's pretty simple
Hmm.
and pretty straightforward. So I did notice on their site that they had an FAQ, and I didn't, Tim, I don't know, maybe you saw that, but I wasn't able to locate that, which covers a lot of this, more of the in the weeds with what's required.
Yeah, we can go back and find that, make sure that's included in the follow-up to this as well, for sure. But
Yep.
as you can see, there's definitely a bunch of information that they want to have in order to get that approval. But it's pretty straightforward. Any
Yeah, I would
real.
add one little thing here, right? And I think this is something that we typically see with, right before an election and after election, is that basically these, PACs will basically start up and they'll have kind of a short lifespan. So, some of them may not have any EIN, some of them might stand up right literally before, a month before the particular election, right? So, a lot of that is considered into the vetting, right? So, if you're working with if you are a political entity, or you're looking to bring on a political entity, it's important to kind of look at how long they've actually in business, right? If when you go to try to register and it's determined that they've only been in business a couple of weeks, you're probably going to have some problems getting that approved. So just take that into consideration. When you're going through this process, right? Entities that have been around longer, who have EINs, they've got it, they are registered with the FEC, verifiable. They've got websites that have been crawled inside and out by Google, right? Can
Yep.
be found through a search, right? Those type of entities, right, are going to have more success when someone who's brand new and no one's ever heard of it. Google hasn't heard of it, right?
Right.
So that's going to be looked at.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me. Scott, as we evaluate partners to work with, that we like to see that their website, is, 18 to 24 months old or more. So it's the
Yep,
same with any verification process. If you've been around a long time, you better chance of getting approved and through that process.
correct.
Makes sense.
Yep.
So here's some of the brand reg restrictions here as well. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I again just
yep,
would defer everybody back to the Campaign Verify website.
yep,
This does have some bullet points that Tim and Sherry had pulled out just to kind of show you some things that you might run into front. So it's good to have it here, but I definitely want to check with the Campaign Verify on the very specifics. And I think you can of course reach out to them. You can
right.
contact them if you've got a particular question or concern.
That's right. You got it. And let's see, let's talk about some requirements. We already talked about this. Just make sure that that stop command actually works, not like this guy that I just got.
Yeah, I mean the expectation with not only the FCC right or TCPA, but also the mobile carriers is you clearly identify who you are.
Yep.
Now, if you're using MMS, I would hope that you would have your brand or your logo or at least the candidate's name in the image. But be very clear who you are, and then it's mandatory, right? And stop is a TCPA requirement, whether it's political or not political. And then I do recommend making sure that you've tested your stop functionality within your platform to make sure that you don't, you receive that correctly and that you remove that subscriber/voter from your contact list. And then it's best practice to send a follow-up confirmation that they have been opted out. This is probably, and the reason it's so important, not only because it's TCPA, but if the stop doesn't work, if you don't register that stop and you keep sending that subscriber or that voter continuous messages, then you're more likely to get in trouble with the carriers, right? Because at that point, they may file a formal complaint, they may flag it under 7726. And it doesn't take a lot of those to get a RCA triggered with a carrier where you have to then go prove your opt-in. Then you have to prove, explain why you didn't opt them out when they asked you to opt out and so forth. So
Right.
can't emphasize how important this component is for your messaging, whether it's political or any messaging. Stop's
Yep.
got to work.
For sure. Yeah, we mentioned this during our last webinar as well, where we talked about how, there's a good chance that some of your messages are going to go to potentially a voter who might be on the other side of the fence, or, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's why it's so important not to be overly abrasive in these messages. Now, some of them go way over the top because, you will receive complaints if it's, clearly inflammatory or can be construed that way. And that's just going to, increase your chances of getting reported, which you don't want.
I can't agree more. And we saw
Yep.
this with the last midterm election, and definitely we got complaints on message content that was abrasive. I guess you don't care about fixing this or that, right?
Right.
And
Right.
it really is just the worst thing that you can do. And you can even have, regardless of what party you align to or your subscribers align to, even within that same party, you can there's a lot of sensitivity and volatility from
Yeah.
one candidate to another, right? So
Yep.
really make it informative, keep it neutral, as Tim stated. And we got this thing here, and we've been kind of promoting that quite a bit for quite some time, is using a copywriter.
Hmm.
Most of the stuff that's getting flagged not only in the initial vetting process, but also content that was approved, but that starts to go out through the carrier networks is, misspelled words, tone, grammar. So many things are just people overlook it and they get sloppy. And when you have sloppy content, then, that also causes problem. Right? You're not going to get the conversion. You're not going to get the click through. And of course, if you're a candidate, you may not get that, that donation, right? Because something in that text message just wasn't right, and that subscriber kind of looked at it weird, like, that seems kind of fishy, kind of thing. So,
That's right.
having a professional copywriter is really best practice in messaging in general, and highly recommended.
Yep. Well, the good news is, Scott, is that this is the first full cycle of a general election where these registration components are in place.
Mm-hmm.
So the senders will be validated. All that data will be in place. It will help the carriers with their delivery, make sure there isn't, spam, bad actors out there as much as possible. But if you add on to that, hey, if you have a copywriter and you're following a more professional writing, editing process before, you even do the registration piece. So hopefully a lot of these campaigns will be going to sort of market with all those things in a row this time, which should
Mhm.
prevent a lot of the issues we've seen over the last couple cycles. Which
Yep.
also means that, yeah, we mentioned earlier that, hiring or having on call a compliance person will help, and that person should know these acronyms: TCPA, CTIA, TCR, CV, all the things we've been talking about. So hopefully
Yep.
this time around things will be much smoother and and
Yep.
help us out, keep voters
Yep.
happy as well as us as the senders.
Exactly. Yeah. When we get into, like you said, right? It's like, there's my first political message.
Yeah,
Uh, and so I think overall the general public, at least here in the US, right? It's like, this is when it starts. And and if you're in the messaging business, if you're a provider, a content provider, a performance marketing company, or a company that strictly services to political messaging, right? I mean, this is one of those things where, the rest of the world kind of looks at us as like, oh, it's time for you guys, right? And so, really a way to kind of minimize the lashback in the messaging industry is to make sure everything's compliant, make sure everything is, the tone, the message content's valuable to the subscriber, right?
gotcha,
And
gotcha.
when they want out, make sure that they're out. Don't keep
Right.
sending to them.
Yep, yep. Message received. I think too, it is important just to reiterate here that we will be including some really important resource links in the post-webinar email to all the folks that registered, and it'll also be on the website right underneath. If you're watching the video on our website, it's just underneath, and
Mhm.
there's even this tip about, if the campaign originates from an ISV, the ISV must be selected as the campaign reseller. That's one of the tips that will be included in that information. So
Sure.
the rules keep on changing.
Yep.
And again, opt-in is really important, that you really want to make sure, as you mentioned at the top of the event, that you want to be sending to people who have opted in to receive this type of messaging.
Yeah. So let's, to just reiterate this, right? And everybody's like, well, it's political. I didn't think that you had to have it. So in the text messaging space, right? Opt-in or consent is required, especially if it's being sent from an automated dialer, basically, right?
Hmm.
Where you can basically how you can send text messages without having direct consent is if it's basically manually dialed.
Hmm.
And so we do know that there's people in the industry who have set up their platforms, and they have volunteers who will trigger the text message from a volunteer's mobile phone or SIM, right, through an app, through the platform. Then that gets distributed to their connectivity partners like Commio, through the DCAs, and then all the way up to the carriers, right? So there's a way to do that, but if you're not doing that, you're using an automated system. You need to have direct consent. And so, if you're new to the space and you are talking to political entities or political candidates, make sure you ask that question: how are they getting direct consent? There's also a question regarding voter rolls, right? So if it's an automated system, but your company or your candidate's using voter roll data, the voter slash subscriber had to opt in through the voter registration, right? So again,
Hmm.
if it's an automated system, you can't use the voter rolls if they haven't provided consent.
Right. Yeah, and I think, and again, Scott, this is something we harp on a lot, which is, if you're the original, sender of a given message, no matter whether it's political or commercial or whatever it is, you want to make sure that when they click on the link that's included in the message, that when they get there, that there's very up-to-date terms and conditions, privacy policy, mobile messaging policies that may be embedded in those policies, that they're up to
Mhm.
date. So a lot of people forget to include information like, we will not, resell your data, or, you just need to be very specific, because that's one of the things that they'll look at when you register, right, to be able to send messages.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's one of, I think, the things that everybody here at Commio can provide really is that guidance of
Yeah.
really what you need to have in order. Not only on your use case and your opt-in information, but also on your website. So, and the MMS side, a lot of the times it'll be like, hey, call this number to make a donation or go to this website. So
Right.
when you provide a URL, the DCAs are going to vet that. They're going to go to your website or your customer's website or your candidate's website, and they're going to follow the processes. They're going to look at the opt-in forms. They're going to look at the opt-in language. Is there anywhere on there that it states that information is shared with other entities or third parties? Is there anywhere in there that states, clearly how often that voter or that subscriber is going to be messaged? So yeah,
Right.
you need to have all of that in order before you even submit it, and that's regardless if it's toll free, 10 DLC, or short code, right? And I think
Yep.
if you're not clear on that, you can definitely reach out to us, and we can tell you specifically what you need to have on your site
Love it.
and your
Abs-
privacy policies, your T's and C's, and so forth.
Absolutely. And we mentioned earlier sort of, how much can you send? So as long as you've registered your political brand, these are sort of the upper tiers of what you're able to send out.
Correct. Yep.
Yep.
And so reiterate that too, right? Is
Yeah,
that the more the DCAs feel that they know who you are, they know that you're an established entity or brand, and you've provided the required information that they need, and they feel like they can trust you, you're going to have those higher throughputs.
there you go.
Yep.
That's right. Great. Well, all right, Scott, I really appreciate your time. I think we got through all the
Sure.
content in a speedy fashion, and there's a lot of new nuggets as we get into 2024. But it really is a massive opportunity. If you are somebody who is not yet working with political campaigns and you have the ability to help them, get their traffic stood up and then send it through somebody like Commio, now's the time. Time's a wasting as these first messages start to appear. And if you are already sending political traffic, again, we'd love to be part of your pipeline to get those messages sent out to constituents. It's something that Scott and all of our teams can assist. Make sure you're registering properly, make sure you're following all the rules, and then let's make sure you get those high throughputs, and then we can give you the return receipts to make sure they're being delivered, and the whole ecosystem we've got here at Commio, all in one
Yep.
place. So something we'd
Yep.
love to talk to you about. And again, we're not here to sell you anything, but we would like to be a trusted resource and see if there's a fit. So go over to commio.com, fill in that get a demo. You can get with our messaging experts. We can get Scott on the line, our other
Of
experts,
course.
and yeah, and
Yep.
let's talk about what you're trying to accomplish. So
Yep.
with that,
Sounds great.
Scott, I'm just looking at my phone, expecting it to light up any time now. There's going to be more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I got my text messages a couple of weeks ago. My first one started
Okay.
trickling through. So I don't know if
All
it's
right.
our customers or someone
Yeah,
else. I always have to check that. So
that's right. All right, Scott. Hey, thanks
awesome.
again for your time, and everybody else, hey, enjoy your back to school slash political season that we're getting into, and let us know how we can help here at Commio, commio.com. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
Talk to you soon. Bye.